Can you actually hear me? Yeah. So a wonderful good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining. So I'm here to talk about how startups can grow their business internationally. But what I'm actually talking about is one of the top reasons why startups either succeed or fail from the outset. My name is Julienne Ernst. I'm leading the international growth team for DACH at Google. And what we do is we work with startups and companies across all business models and industries to help them sell their products internationally and grow their business internationally. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some of the insights and the learnings that we have, what it really takes to succeed. When we're thinking about international growth and expansion, the speed and the change in speed and scale over the past years is astonishing. If you're thinking about traditional global brands, such, for example, Hilton, how long did it take them to actually make the move from the first country to go internationally? And it's a mind-blowing 24 years until they decided to make that move. So moving forward to now, a lot has changed. And when we're thinking of one of the arguably biggest accommodation providers in the world, the speed was different. And since it's a lunch break and we're probably all a bit tired, I would like to make this an interactive quiz. So I'm going to ask you, how many years did it take Airbnb to go to the first foreign country? And I will ask everyone to get up your hands. Everyone, get up your hands. And I'm going to count down the years. And when you think I'm at the right answer, you lower your hands. So who thinks it was 5 years? Lower your hands. Who thinks it was 4? 3, anyone? 2? And here are the winners. It was actually a bit less than 1 year. And what is even more astonishing, it took them only 8 years to expand to 90 countries. So if you want to go internationally, you have to have speed and scale and actually understanding the next markets and setting up your operations. And then if you look, especially for startups and companies, there is no other way to actually grow internationally. And let's look at some facts to back up this claim. So one fact we're looking at Google is query volume. So the searches that consumers worldwide put into Google products when they search for products, services, or brands. And that might surprise you, but it's a very, very accurate indicator of the market demand and how the market is going to move forward in the future. And what you see is, take an example, Germany, for some random selected categories, the search is actually 5 times bigger in the EU than in Germany, and 15 times bigger worldwide. So when I first saw this number, I was like, okay, honestly, I kind of expected more. So let's look at it, what it actually really means in terms of hard money. So we are estimating at Google that the cross-border e-commerce in the EU is likely to double by 2022. In 2018, it was 137 billion. We expect it to be at 245 by 2022, so doubling. So there's really, really money in going international. And if you're still not convinced, let's look at the consumers. Already 1 in 2 shoppers are buying from international websites. So your search volume is 15 times bigger worldwide than in the domestic market. The cross-border revenue is going to double by 2022, and consumers are already buying online, internationally. So our question is, why are there not more Airbnbs out there? So what is really holding companies, especially startups, back? In fact, geographic expansion is one of the top reasons why startups actually fail from the outset. And we at Google, we are naturally curious, and we wanted to know what is actually prohibiting our customers to do so. So we did a customer survey, and found 2 interesting facts. First, 60% said they lack access to relevant market information. They actually simply don't know what is the next market to go to. And that is actually no surprise, because it costs time, it costs money, it costs resources to find out. And it's a long, week, months-long research project before you actually started to build your business and make money. And especially for startups, that's a problem, because you have to show to your investors that you have a scalable business, but you're really strapped for resources to actually do this. The second was even more surprising. 83% said they lack the know-how on overcoming operational hurdles. So they know the domestic market very, very well, but when they want to go to other countries, they don't simply know how to set up a supply chain, how to set up, to localize their assets, how to set up payments, how to set up customer care service. And that's why they actually don't decide to go there. And we in Google were like, okay, but we know. So how can we actually help our customers to do that? And I want to share now an approach what we learned from working with companies of all sizes and business models, what do you need to do. It's a very simple approach. It's plan, build, connect. When we come to plan, what do companies, especially startups, do to grow? First of all, they're very clear about the KPIs. They're very clear if they want to optimize for profit, if they want to grow the customer base, if they want to look for customer lifetime value. And they have the entire company behind it. This is super important, because I guess a lot of people have been in meetings where you discuss the success, and probably your marketing department talks about click-through rates and ROAS. Your CFO talks about operating profit, and your CEO wants a nice story for his investors. So be very, very clear what your KPIs are. Second, they use data, a lot of data points, especially digital data, and make a very fast decision on markets. Decide on one market, double down, and start testing. Once you know your market and you want to build, they are starting to build the operations with the local requirements in mind. So they're not just replicating what they know. They're not just translating everything in English. They're looking at different factors, for example, localization. It's not about translating your website and your assets. It's about getting the right look and feel. Like, for example, if you go to Japan, your website has to be crazy, colorful, and it has to be targeted at mobile speed. So, second, if you look at payments, massively overlooked. A lot of companies decide to go with credit cards because it's an easy way to guarantee you get your money. But like, for example, to our neighboring country like Netherlands, 40% of all e-commerce goes via a payment provider called Ideal. If you don't have that, your conversion will stop at that moment. Or look, we have a lot of customers struggling with Poland, and in Poland, people expect to pay cash on delivery. If you don't offer that, your customers won't buy it you. Or look at customer care. Again, an example of Japan. People are very comfortable here to interact with chatbots. Try the same in Italy. No, people want to speak to a person. So it's very important to make sure that you have your operations set up to the local country from the outset. And finally, connect. Know the marketing mix and the device mix to connect with your customer. For example, can't reiterate, understand how important mobile is. So in Germany, only 37% of searches go via mobile, but if you, for example, already go to France, that's nearly 50%. So you need to be optimized for mobile. So now we are at the chicken and egg problem, because it becomes very, very clear that you need to really have local knowledge of your market to make decisions. But as we said, it's very hard, especially for startups, to do that. So we at Google, we built a tool that is not that much known, and we also have it launched, I think, for Germany today. And it's called Market Finder. And what it does is, for your company, in a couple of minutes, will analyze and prioritize the markets for you. How do we do that? So basically, you just type in your company name. It will go through thousands and thousands of categories to understand really what your products are, what your business model is, what your business is. And then pull different hundreds of data points. Digital data points such as search, CPC, search growth, economic factors such as household purchasing power, or qualitative data such as, for example, ease of doing business. And out of this, it will give you suggestions in which markets to go and how to enter and set up the operations. So this entire project that normally costs and takes your resources and costs for weeks and months, we've lowered to a couple of days to give you actually the time back to build your business. I want to close with two very important pointers, because I think a lot of people look when they think about international or traditional KPIs, do SWOT analysis, competitor analysis, and so on. Please think that you can use digital data for it, and that it actually speeds up process quite a bit. So when we look at Google, for example, we look at search growth and CPC and search volume, and that gives us a very good indicator. Here's an example. If I know my search growth is high and I have a good volume, that this might be an interesting market. When we're thinking about competition, we use, for example, ad depth, that is the auction pressure, to see if it's competitive and if it's actually easy to enter or not. So for example, here for France, low ad depth, low CPC, that might be an interesting market for you to enter. So take digital KPIs in your decisions as well. And a final thought, don't always go for the big countries. Consider also countries that have very small economies and where shoppers are naturally buying international. For example, the highest share of international shoppers are in Latvia, Portugal, and Croatia, so you might want to take them into your portfolio as well. So this is how Google thinks. I would like to take now the opportunity. We have Gaston Torun, he's the CMO at Emma, a company that has a massive, impressive international growth, and he would like to share with us today how they succeeded and what the struggles they overcame.
Hello. Great.
So first of all, Gaston, thank you very much for joining us today. For those who don't know Emma and don't know you, if you could probably explain what you do and your journey.
Sure. So just 1 year ago, I was working actually at Google. So I'm quite new to the mattress world, but definitely I'm very familiar with how digital can enable growth. So last year, I moved into startup world, and I became CMO for a group of dating apps in London. And just 4 months ago, I decided to move to Emma. Why? Well, first of all, because from dating to sleeping, there is only one step. So that was kind of like personal motivation. But also, I think, because Emma has been one of the most successful startups in Europe. In fact, last year, we achieved record growth. It became the fastest growing startup in Europe by growing 14,000%, which is massive. And I think it has a lot to do with the way the company has been managed and the way that they have done marketing really smartly. So for me, it was jumping into an opportunity and drive a second wave of growth.
I mean, from dating to sleeping, I wish I had this clear thread in my CV. So you said 14,000. That's really, really impressive. Could you maybe share what was fueling this growth and also where you want to take Emma moving forward?
I think it was a very agile mindset, and I think it's something that is important for all startups to remember. Being agile is not a luxury, it's the only way you can survive. In our case, when it comes to being agile, we made a lot of decisions based on data that was already available online. We use, for example, Market Finder as a tool to expand to new markets. But also, when it comes to, for example, finding the right message that could potentially attract more customers in markets, we didn't run very long market research surveys that take a lot of time, and also they are in artificial environments. It's not where the customer is actually making a purchase decision. Rather than doing that, we run, for example, A/B tests on Google Ads. That help us understand which message drives higher conversion, drives more sales, and then we went 100% for it. So I think efficient marketing spend has been probably the recipe of success.
Yeah. Yeah, Michel Vette, also with Google, industry manager for startups and VCs. So a question from my side. What straight KPIs did you use to select which markets you wanted to enter? Like, you had such a bright range of potential KPIs to consider. We had the presentation from Julienne, seeing so many things you could have taken into account. Which were your 3 main considerations before selecting a country?
Yeah, I think Julienne's message of basically focusing on a few KPIs and really making them almost the North Star of your business is super important. I think it's definitely the key for success. In our case, we always focus on ROAS. So in established markets, we focus on return on ad spend. Sorry, I'm a marketer, I use some jargon, but it's very simple. It's literally how much money you spend on advertising, what's the return that comes from it. So we are very, as I said, like very ROAS-focused company. But at the same time, we do know that when you enter a new market, it's quite, I would say, ambitious to expect that customers would buy you immediately. So rather than focusing, for example, on ROAS in established markets, we focus on click-through rate. Again, sorry, another jargon, but it's basically as simple as how many people click your ads. Because that means that you're sending a message to that new customer set that could be potentially attractive and interesting. So I would say ROAS for markets that you're established. For markets that you're starting, I would focus more on upper funnel metrics, still within, of course, a digital environment, like click-through rate.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. If you selected a market, sometimes it didn't work out. What were the factors when you decided, OK, we did a test and it doesn't work out, we have to leave the market and look for another market to expand?
We are a very stubborn company, so we never decide just like, OK, let's leave and go. Actually, it's very funny. Our company values, they all relate to sleep. And one of them exactly says, ownership never rests. Because we're always looking to basically find new solutions and find new ways to work. So we have never left a market. What we do is, of course, when we see that a market is not performing as we expect, we run new tests quite fast on Google, on digital, to know how we can drive higher sales. And I think, I have particularly one case maybe from the US. The US is a very competitive market. It's a market that is really hard to enter. In our case, we tested different messages on Google Ads, and what we saw is that what American consumers were very interested from our brand is to promise them a European sleep experience. So suddenly we ran 2 different Google Ads, and we saw that Americans were mega interested in buying our brand because we were promising them a European sleep experience. Then what the hell that means, we had to figure out, basically. But it was very interesting that just with a Google ad, we could actually make a market work that was incredibly competitive, and now we're working basically to make sure that that brand promise is also delivered.
Do you have different brand promises for different categories also of users? You just talked about markets. Do you have the same like for different user groups, which you developed out of your findings that you made in ads?
I think this is a very interesting discussion in the marketing industry. I'm meeting with a lot of CMOs that basically are struggling to think, what is the brand essence, right? There is this essentialist approach, let's say, to brand marketing that has this kind of like beautiful pyramids, which like what is like the core of your brand, what is the message of your brand. I think these kind of models don't work really well on digital. I rather believe on what is called adaptive or flexible brand marketing. And I think that means, of course, you're going to have some boundaries of what has to be said and what cannot be said, but then you can play within those boundaries in order to make sure you attract different groups.
You mentioned that you entered in the US successfully. Which other countries did you actually enter as well?
So we're currently available in half of the world's population. And that has a lot to do with entering 2 markets, India and China. So if you enter India and China, it's a very good tip, basically, to enter a lot of new populations.
So, I mean, US, India, China is so vast different countries. I mean, you must have had a couple of sleepless nights, and I guess your team must have had a couple of sleepless nights when you actually suggested to do that. How do you actually work in a team to convince everyone, CFO, a CEO, or maybe even an investor, so that's a good decision to make?
As I mentioned before, we always start with digital data points. So a great reason that we consider, for example, to expand into a market like India is that we saw on Google Market Finder that the search volumes for mattresses in India was the fastest growing globally. So there were more people searching for mattresses on Google in India than in any other country in the world. And it was just spiraling high up. Of course, there were a lot of complexities, right? You're entering a market that is massive and has a lot of operational challenges. But the way we work, and also I would say is the way that you can succeed as a startup, is being very agile. We said, let's start testing if actually Indian consumers can be interested in our product. We saw a lot of high interest, and then we started shipping mattresses from Germany to India. So that was like the original setup. It was no kind of like local supply chain or logistics. It was more, let's figure out if there is interest. There is interest, great. Let's start shipping mattresses from Germany. Now, of course, the interest is so high that we have to figure out how to have a local production house and all that. But that comes after. And I think my trick there is just be very close with your COO, CMO, and COO. Try to have a good friendship, and then they figure out how to make it happen.
You just said shipping new mattresses, and you're trying to figure out how to build that in India. Are there any key considerations that especially companies of your size have to take into account when they set up operations there?
I think, again, it comes a lot to considering who is your customer and trying to adapt to them. You mentioned, for example, some key areas like payment methods. Definitely, you need to know what your customers want in that market. In a market like India, they really prefer cash on delivery. So if you don't have cash on delivery, it's going to be really hard to win. But then there are other nuances. Something that is quite interesting about India is that in the West, we're kind of like all of us used to having a standard size, right? Like beds are more or less the same size. That's not the case in India. Indians prefer to have someone come into their house, measuring basically their height, and then making a bed that is their own size. And as you can imagine, that was another nice talk with my COO to figure out how we could produce custom-size mattresses.
So, I mean, you had a lot of success cases, and obviously your growth rate, I think you're the world's fastest growing startup at the moment. So you do something wrong, all right? But have there been moments where you had to change your strategy?
Yes. I think that's another great thing about digital, that you're not going to have massive failures. What you're going to see is that certain maybe direction you were taking is not the right one, and then you can quickly readjust. I think that's also a really important thing about our company culture in Bettzeit. Whenever there is a mistake, we never finger point. We just sit down and we figure out what we can fix. Our company value there is eyes open to logic. And exactly that happened when we found, for example, some results from YouTube campaigns. So we were running some YouTube campaigns, and what we saw is that the creatives were much more appealing to a male audience rather than a female audience. And suddenly we were like, wow, like our main consumer group is actually women. Women are the ones that are buying mattresses. How this happened. But it was very interesting because then what we started doing is like testing new messages that could be more interesting for a female audience. And that was a complete shift of our direction, but also I think a very interesting learning that we took, not by doing a lot of market research, just by testing 2 different videos on YouTube.
Okay.
This is in the end one of the suggestions you also give all the people who are considering going international and also moving to new markets. Maybe you could just summarize your main 3 takeaways, which everybody who considers going international should have in mind before going there, and how they can do this really intense process most efficiently.
Yeah, I think if there is one thing to remember is that you need to be a child. Not just being a child because it sounds cool and it's kind of like great to say that, but it's because it's the only way you can survive in the startup ecosystem. If you're not fast enough, you're probably going to lose. And I think being a child means, particularly I would say when it comes to e-commerce or different kind of digital businesses, means two things. One is learning fast. And I think a lot of the learning fast comes from digital advertising. Particularly with Google tools, I think you can learn really, really fast what kind of message works better, which kind of markets are more interesting to expand to. Market Finder has been, for example, incredibly useful for us in that sense. So learning fast is something that you need to do if you want to survive. And I would say the second one is don't be scared by operations and logistics. First of all, be a good friend with your COO. If you're a CMO, I think it's really important having that relationship. But secondly, of course, go test, see if it works. You can ship your product from wherever you are, and then you figure out the logistics if there is consumer interest.
Lovely.
Thank you for your summary, and thank you for sharing your insights here with us. Really helpful. We as Google also formed a team to help every startup here in the room to make the most of out of their marketing dollars and accelerate with us. So we want to bring together the best of Google. Google Cloud, app dev, so helpful app developers and making the app more heard. And also everything we have in our Google Shelf, Maps, the Play Store, whatever you need is in one team and all the resources are there. So we want to help you, especially in those phases, launch and growth, making there the most of your marketing dollars in the time where they are most stretched and the impact is most important. What are your major benefits? You get a direct contact, one-to-one support, which is not usual in this normal phase of your growth curve. We support you building campaigns, not only for international cases, but also for national cases and optimizing them. This is for 3 to 6 months and doesn't really cost anything. If you're interested, come to us. I think here in the room there are Zini and David. Maybe you stand up, and Ayub. Otherwise, come to me at the booth afterwards and get in contact. Here to help and happy to grow with you. The slides that Julienne presented are available. Just scan the code, give us feedback, and you will given the slides by email. Thank you.
Thank you very much.